Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. UK imposes visa requirement for Trinidad and Tobago nationals. La Romaine woman freed after 16 years on remand. Police seize illegal surveillance cameras in crime hotspot. And internationally, US proposes 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine war. Now for the details. The United Kingdom has announced that effective immediately, all Trinidad and Tobago nationals will now require a visa to enter the UK, including for short visits. The decision, revealed on March 12th, follows what UK authorities describe as a sharp rise in TNT nationals arriving as visitors and then seeking asylum. The British government stated that the move aims to prevent misuse of the electronic travel authorization system and safeguard its immigration process. A transit visa will also be required from March 13th, but a 6-week transition period allows those with prior bookings and ETAs to travel visa-free until April 23rd. British High Commissioner John Dean emphasized that the change aligns TNT with other visa-required nations and aims to balance border security with safe travel. Meanwhile, Foreign Affairs Minister Dr. Amory Brown expressed disappointment, arguing that the decision unfairly impacts legitimate travelers due to the actions of a small group. UK government data shows asylum claims from TNT nationals jumped from an annual average of 49 to 439 in the past year. Officials say the policy will be reviewed over time. For visa applications, TNT nationals must now apply online and schedule an appointment at the Visa Application Center in Port of Spain, which has expanded its operations to meet demand. A 47-year-old La Romaine woman has been freed after spending nearly 16 years on remand for the killing of her abusive husband. Rasha Sobrian and her former co-worker Rowan Campbell were sentenced for manslaughter in the High Court, with the judge ruling that Sobrian had already served her time. Campbell, who carried out the fatal attack in 2008 after learning of Sobrian's abuse, will be released in just under 2 years. Their sentencing follows a plea deal with the DPP's office, which saw their original murder charges reduced. Justice Devon Rampasad acknowledged Sobrian never directly requested her husband's death and placed her on 3 years probation to help rebuild family ties. Police have seized 22 unauthorized security cameras in sea lots, which they believe were used to monitor law enforcement patrols and rival gangs. During early morning operations involving multiple police units and TNTEC officials, illegal electricity connections were also uncovered. Several structures had been tapping into the power grid with makeshift wiring. 6 men and 3 women were arrested for electricity theft, while cybercrime experts are investigating the camera system's origins. Officers suspect the installations were part of wider criminal activity. Meanwhile, police also arrested a suspected high-ranking gang member during the operation. Internationally, the United States has proposed an immediate 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine, calling on Russia to agree to the terms. The plan, backed by Ukraine, aims to halt hostilities while both sides negotiate a long-term peace deal. The agreement also includes restoring U.S. military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine, which had been paused. However, concerns remain that Russia could use the ceasefire to regroup without making real concessions. President Trump insists the deal will provide security for Ukraine, but critics argue it lacks firm guarantees and may leave Ukraine vulnerable in the long run. Negotiations with European allies and Russia are expected to continue in the coming weeks. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
In 3 days, we are going to see a change. It's not something that we're accustomed to. It is the voluntary handing over of power, or at least the beginning of it. Because usually what will be given up on the 16th goes hand in hand with a parallel set of power, authority, and responsibility. That is to say, usually one is prime minister and political leader, but we will see, well, technically for the second time in this country's history, but for the first time perhaps with regards to the highest office of the land, that being separated, if only momentarily in the grand scheme of things. And the commentary and the anticipation and the perception, all of these things, it's kind of interesting because, you know, we don't necessarily have a precedent to point to that is a direct comparison, because that's human nature. We want direct comparisons. We'll try and find imperfect comparisons, but they don't necessarily quite fit. And to some extent, the comparisons are what make this situation interesting, because different people will perceive different comparisons with more importance than others. I don't know if I made my point clear enough. Of course, there will be some people that look at the Prime Minister, look at the date of the 16th. In 2 days, the airport in Tobago should be opened. Now, to what extent is that a full opening, ready for operations? Not entirely sure, right? Whatever will be with that. Obviously, at this point, it's built for the most part. So I must hope now that two things, at the very least, it's properly completed and it can be practically have its operations commenced. But that's going to happen in 2 days. And then in 3 days, the Prime Minister will, I guess, go to the President. I'm not even sure if there's precedent to tell him exactly how to handle this handover, you know, officially. This might be one of those things that we don't necessarily have something in the Constitution to directly cover it, right? As many things over the last couple of years has been exposed. Usually it's for the bad. This is more for the neutral. I don't mind him taking a couple weeks to be there to open the airport, because that's basically what it is. He had stuff to finish up in February with regards to CARICOM. Then 2 weeks into March, stuff to open, photo opportunities for a retired politician or retiring. I don't mind it. Those who do put value on that tend to not necessarily have the mindset that I am aligned with. But while that statement might, and I to some extent try to lessen the blow overall, while that statement could cut both ways in this scenario, I'm slashing less in the direction of the Prime Minister. Because at the end of the day, it's not as though he's holding on for 6 to 8 months just so that he could open the airport and try to ensure that it's part of his legacy. When the fact of the matter is, if you really care about the country, things like that, they're not that big of a deal to you. Who opens the airport is less important than the airport project being implemented in the first place, completed, the quality of the construction, the future operations, and if the industry could, now that we have this asset, utilize it to the extent that it could be justified, the costs. And the airport came with more than just the financial costs. Or will it be like Napa? Essentially, not necessarily UTT behind the concert hall, but the stage itself, the performance venue. It's a bit of a waste, really. But there are other things that, if you really care about the country, to be worried about. The Prime Minister having a photo opportunity is not it. One of the things, and this is reiterated with one of the latest NACTA polls, the results were released yesterday. Essentially, and I don't think they are pointed or directly pointing out the differences in leadership in the parties, but essentially they're looking at, look, they're looking at Dr. Rowley's voluntarily stepping down. And part of the quote in today's Newsday is, instead of being pushed out of politics, Rowley is leaving his forte on his own accord, marking the first time in the Twin Island Republic's history that our politicians are walking away from the exalted prime ministerial position. And then they point out that, you know, in refusing to leave at the right time, politicians harm their party's interests. So, voters apparently are giving this whole succession scenario support. They support his decision to resign, to step down, to not wear out his welcome, and to have someone succeed him. Now, if you're a sports fan, you may know, and this is maybe more of an American sports thing than a European sports thing or international. So I don't know if cricket, football, etc., they have a similar concept or ideology in that in American sports, whether it's college or professional basketball, football, American football, what have you, there comes a point in time where onlookers or observers might say, you know, and the coaches themselves might say, look, it's time for a change because the message is no longer effective because, you know, the time as a coach has run its course and an organization needs change, right? The coaching style has become stale. The message has become stale. The complacency of kind of just sticking to one system, which to some extent is not always going to be the most appropriate because the environment changes. And perhaps with regards to leadership as well, when you stay in one place too long, you become stagnant, you could end up, now transitioning to government, you could end up being stale. You could end up kind of just going through the motions and doing what you think is best, but maybe depending on the environmental changes and conditions, not always actually best. So it is time for a new perspective, fresh blood, also new energy. And not all parties are adopting that position. And now it leads me to the question of will that, because they didn't name the opposition here, but the implication both now and one of the previous NACTA polls when they brought this up is that the opposition holding firm to its long-standing political leader might not be seen as a positive by the moderate voters. Yes, by the base, because she has, for whatever reason, cemented her position with the base supporters who make up the party members, for the most part, who vote for these internal elections, who the leader would be. Now the question is, perhaps this is one of the reasons why what should be an advantageous position, you are the opposition to a two-term incumbent, you should have relatively no bad press to the two-term incumbent having all the bad press by default because they're in government. They are being nitpicked for policy decisions. They're being nitpicked whenever anything goes wrong. Even if technically it wasn't their fault, the point is they're in charge, the buck stops with them, so people will look at them harshly, critically. They will take out their frustrations on the government, the elected majority, whether rightfully or wrongfully, because they feel entitled to their lives being made a little bit better. That's all they ask, really, any population. And failure to do so regardless of the reasons, because if you can't manage, even in difficult situations, well then obviously someone else needs a chance, right? The PNM is supposed to be at a heavy disadvantage in this election, but it doesn't feel like that. And the question is, to some extent, not with regards to the validity of Kamala Persad-Bissessa's candidacy in general, but rather if at this point, given the length of time she's been in politics and has held the position of political leader and has lost 2 elections, is the rest of the voters outside of the party bases, because obviously the PNM party bases would never support her. So that's not really a group that should be considered similarly to the UNC's own base. That voting pattern is essentially locked in. What you care about are the people in the middle. Now, to what extent are they undecided voters, moderate voters? The point is, potentially that's where you'll find votes up to grabs, which is important for a party that technically lost the last 2 times. So you don't want the status quo to remain, but instead of potentially trying to encourage new voters, you tend to be doing all of the things to cement a repeat result. We don't need help. Well, technically it did make a coalition afterwards, but it isn't much of a coalition to be, if anybody wanted to nitpick that. Same leadership, seemingly same philosophies, mostly the same people. We're not changing. We don't need change. We don't really need much help, just the help that we won't technically admit that we need. But what we're seeing is more of the same. So much so that they're dipping into the playbook of the partnership apparently, and that was the administration that lost the election to the opposition, Dr. Keith Rowley. So I fail to see how this is going to be an improvement without considerable explanation and, I guess you could say, at the end of the day, change. But the UNC seems to be cemented in trying to go with familiar, which is a polite way of saying same old, same old. How does that inspire the voters in the middle who may not vote for you, but who you need if you want to get over the hump? I have no idea. Meanwhile, like the NACTA poll has said, not once, but now twice, this move, regardless of how we perceive all of the minute details, is seen as popular. And this is an interesting thing, because whether fair or not, whether if it's correct or not, whether if it's ethical or not even, the transition to Stuart Young is seen to some extent as a litmus test with regards to, okay, how much further will we be willing to break away from the racial mold of our prime ministerial position, the leadership of the country. There's an article that points to that. This one is in The Guardian. The first one was in the Newsday. Points to that saying, look, there were even some that might have thought Dr. Keith Rowley was too black. To what extent that's true or not, I myself cannot necessarily remember, because at the end of the day, he did more or less, he was the presumed and the most supported PNM politician coming out of that defeat in 2010. So, but the point is, the country voted for him. Now will they vote for Stuart Young? I don't necessarily want Stuart Young to get votes just because we have to prove to ourselves that a Chinese man can get elected. That sort of affirmative action selection, that'll fly with me. Just because you are of a different demographic and we need to prove that we could be inclusive, that doesn't make you a good candidate. His candidacy should be based on his ability, which has come into question, all things considered. But it's a tricky thing because, to some extent, his time of service is based in the current political environment, of which he has not had full control over, so to what extent could you really analyze, single out what is due to his decisions, his own ability, and what was put upon him, set upon him, or he potentially allowed to happen? There's also, at the end of the day, there's pointed to the fact that he's going to inherit a situation in part due to external shocks, and more on that towards the end of the hour. And it's not going to be easy. And I'll say this. When you have the wrong candidate to break the mold, because you're more concerned about breaking the mold than actually finding a good candidate, that could be for the position of Prime Minister, that could be for, I don't know, Commissioner of Police. When all you're concerned about is breaking the mold, you run the risk of putting the wrong candidate up there. And if they fail, whether due to their own fault or to the fault of others, the point is if they fail, then because you made a big deal of the whole, this is the first, that is the first, you who put a big deal on the first female this, or the first Chinese that, or the first etc. If it fails, because you've elevated it on that dimension, you leave it open. You leave that individual's time in office open to criticisms on that dimension. And you set back that whole debate, that whole discussion, that whole consideration. You set it back if you pick the wrong candidate just because you want inclusion now, as opposed to finding the right candidate. Now, is Stuart Young the right candidate? That's the question, right? Maybe we'll get that answer on election, on the day after the elections when we get the results, maybe. Maybe we won't. Maybe we'll have to wait and see if he manages to win, then what will come out of it? What will he do? Like I mentioned before, we're in a challenging situation where to some extent the pressure that's upon us is not necessarily directly due to the decisions of our leaders, but how they manage and limit that pressure and deal with a bad hand. At the end of the day, you don't need to have high in order to win a round of oral fours. You could sneak off your jack. You could maybe even sneak off game. It all depends on how you play. And like I said, we don't need average Joes as our politicians. I understand that they're human too, and that to some degree is acceptable. But in theory, we're supposed to have exceptional people up there because we're picking our leaders. And why would you want the leader of any organization to be average? Not an average leader, but an average individual in the group. Then what's the point of having them leader? Unless the group is made up of exceptional people. But in a nation, that's not going to be the case. It's just not. And dare I say, one of the issues that we have is that we have accepted less than the best. We have tolerated low performance individuals in high office. I actually do think that if our political landscape was at a higher standard, Dr. Keith Rowley's administration probably would be a lot more effective. Same Prime Minister, but if we had better candidates, because our government is more than just one man. Ironically, that and all could sink Stuart Young, the available people around him to form the government. We have to wait and see how it goes. It's exciting, but it's also terrifying. Because to what extent are we, at the end of the day, all of these indicators are pointing to some extent or another. Same old, same old. We know that's coming out of the opposition. but is it also going to ring true despite whatever changes they have had so far from the PNM? And even from the TPP, we see some of that as well. To what extent that should alarm us, to what extent that will end up being completely true, it remains to be seen with the people in Tobago. I hope not, because again, they broke the mold, and if they fail, similar to the COP that broke the mold, it will set back the population's willingness to engage with new political entities. And I think right now, the problem is politics in this country is more like a cartel than a competition. All right. I've gone on a bit long to the start of the show, so we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll go into the daily review. There's a big topic that has a lot of people upset, and ironically, everybody's upset on this issue. But yet, I can't necessarily say that we're all agreeing on it. Stay tuned. This is Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back after this.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Radiographer at the radiology departments at the community hospital. We offer high-quality service with state-of-the-art equipment in X-ray, ultrasound, CT, and mammogram. Come, our friendly staff awaits you.
Give us a call at 235-5479.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
And what seems like a very sudden turn of events, the British High Commission announced, I believe yesterday, that effective, I think it's 6 weeks, because there will be a bit of a grace period, Trinbagonians will require a visa in order to travel to the UK. This visa could see a fee up to either 9,000 to 11,000 TT dollars. I'm not entirely sure exactly why, because both prices say if one is looking for the maximum stay of 6 months for a visit, it could be less. So you have to pay anywhere from 1,000 TT to 9,000 or even 11,000 TT for this visa, depending on how long your stay is, what you're applying for. And that is essentially effective immediately, I believe, but there will be a certain grace period, a transition period until April the 23rd. This is going to preempt or replace the electronic travel authorization. And the reason given for this is that, according to the High Commissioner, because I believe this was announced by a video I believe you could get it on their social media, on their Facebook page. On this occasion, there's been a significant increase in the number of unjustified asylum applications by TNT nationals at the UK border. Unfortunately, the actions of a small minority have meant that our ministers have had to take the difficult decision to introduce a visa requirement. Now, there's a lot to make of this. I'll go straight into the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He questions the proportionality of this whole situation because he pointed the fact. It's in the quote there by the High Commissioner. The High Commissioner himself said, minimal, unfortunately, actions of a small minority. So Dr. Brown is basically saying, right, it will, I just want to see, we are not of the view that regular travelers to the UK should be negatively affected by a relatively small number of persons who have been trying to abuse the British immigration system. Because apparently, according to one individual who was granted asylum, he is looking at, because of the process, the fact that the UK doesn't necessarily go back to the home country, might not get a full version of events, that the asylum process costs them a whole lot of money. Like, it's complicated, so it doesn't matter that it's a small number of people. Because of the situation, Britain is saying, we're going to pump the brakes on this. Now, it's important to note, apparently, Jamaica, among other Caribbean nations, although I single out Jamaica because they're a part of the Commonwealth, former British colony, have those ties. They also have a visa requirement, right? My initial reaction, and I'll come back to this in a bit, is that it's not just the small minority, the small, a small number of people recently that's causing the British government to do this, right? And again, the High Commissioner said, use the phrase himself, small minority. What I think this is that immigration and illegal immigration and asylum seeking politically is a very charged subject in first world countries, particularly in the United States and Europe. Brexit to some extent happened because people could essentially cross the Mediterranean, enter Europe, get asylum or whatever status in Italy or Germany or France or what have you, and then legally make their way to the UK, and the UK had no means, no right to stop them because, A, they were accepted into Europe and they have to abide by European immigration laws. That's one of the reasons why they said nope. And they had Brexit. The validity of Brexit, that's a whole different debate. The point is, one of the issues is this whole immigration situation. At the end of the day, Poland, who had a lot stricter controls over asylum seeking and illegal immigration, they're saying, hey, we're not suffering some of the things the rest of y'all are suffering from. So now the UK, in part, could be looking at the whole situation. They might be more sensitive to these matters. They might have a quicker head trigger on these matters. This is my speculation on it. We, to some extent, are victims due to the moment, Peter paying for Paul, but also the Peter that's paying for Paul, the Paul would be how often, you know, how many of our nationals through the years did take advantage of the immigration policies to illegally migrate to the United Kingdom. So some of it is we're paying for the rest of the world, but some of it is the future trainees might be paying for past trainees. Because it has happened, right? But the thing is, it seemed to be that the UK was willing to have a blind eye to that situation in the past. The whole, well, you go up to visit and you just never leave. Trainees do that going to America, they do that going to the UK, right? And nobody necessarily made up a fuss. But because illegal immigration is a bigger issue now, the tolerance for it probably has been reduced. The levels don't necessarily have to have significantly increased or increase at all. Now, the criticisms for this, there's two directions. First, there's the public backlash, right? Which they are basically, apparently there's a sentiment, and this tends to happen. When a foreign country does something to us, we want to feel that we could do it back to them. And I would say, let's not do that, please. To some extent, it's not going to matter that much to them. What that's going to do is, instead of maybe getting a cruise ship with a lot of British tourists, we just won't get that cruise ship. Instead of getting flights coming from the UK, we just won't get those flights. They don't need our tourists. Trinbagonians are not a major part of the UK tourism market. Not to say that we're chopped liver, that we don't exist. But they could get tourists from elsewhere. Our foreign tourists primarily come from Scandinavian countries and maybe Britain. In the past, we also saw people from France and Germany go to Tobago. Yes, business people might come to Trinidad and the diaspora might come to Trinidad. But for the most part, the visitors, they're coming from Europe. They're budget travelers. We're not getting a whole set of rich people. So we want to put these tit-for-tat things into play. This is not the EU versus America. This is Trinidad and Tobago versus the UK. It is not on the same level. If we try to do a tit-for-tat, the UK government will say, okay, sure. They don't really care. We look at the UK as a place that we could maybe go to try and find different opportunities. The UK does not necessarily look at TNT as a place where its citizens could go to try and find different opportunities. And the UK was a path, an easier path for many trainees to try to migrate to a foreign country to seek out, because look, you're not going to get all of the opportunities in various industries here because a lot of industries just don't exist. Our country is too small to support certain things. It is what it is. We might not want to admit that we are a small country. A small country comes with a lot of disadvantages economically. We don't want to think of ourselves as small. We're not small. We're Trinidad and Tobago. We're giants. Oh, wait, we've squandered our wealth, our oil and gas money, and now we want to act as though we are going to be able to inflict any sort of reciprocal pain on the United Kingdom's government. No, what we will do is we will harm our tourism products. We will further potentially harm future immigration of our people to there. Now, the opposition leader has come out, and there's the next dimension to this whole situation. She is saying, look, it's our government's fault. And essentially, it's the failure of crime that has led to the UK government to do this, which, and I find it interesting that the opposition, rightfully so in this case, has to put the disclaimer that they find no joy in this situation, because one of the least effective counter arguments you get from the government is, why are you taking joy in our pain? It's like, there's no joy here. Well, one could argue maybe the opposition is having some joy, but publicly they're not going to admit it, right? And to be fair, that's not the point of the statements. It is a somewhat reasonable argument, although I don't necessarily think it is to be true. But as was pointed out by Amory Brown, it doesn't seem like the stated reason is the full reason. So to what extent is the crime situation driving this? Now, at first I thought that Kamala Bissessar was saying that the UK doesn't want violent Trinbagonians to end up leaving our country to go to theirs. But she's also pointing out that, look, there's a growing number apparently of asylum seekers. And maybe the UK is looking at the situation, they're running away from the crime. But depending on how this situation goes, that number might increase, not just in total over time, but the rates. But she did point out some of these asylum seekers are gang members and criminals. We do know that criminal operations are being run with individuals not in TNT, some of these shot callers and leaders. So and then she makes a good point, although I don't think it will be quite as on the same level as the UK making this announcement, but she points out the fact that, look, this could lead to other international situations where they will have to adjust how they treat our nationals. The strength of our passport might dip. Now, she did use a more extreme way to frame it, that it could be the beginning of our possible international isolation. And she has also pointed the fact that maybe we're too close in the past, not in this instance, I believe, that we may be too close to the Maduro regime, and governments of the world might not look too fondly on that. The truth is, to some extent, this seemingly comes from the internal politics of the United Kingdom. Speculating on it and trying to point fingers on any one specific reason probably is not a good idea. I think rather it's a wake-up call that in general we just need to do better, probably across multiple areas. One did not break the camel's back in this instance. So then the question is, what are we going to do about it? We take it for granted. God is a Trinity. We are entitled to go up there on a visa and stay. If it's the United States or if it's the UK, to just go there and stay if you want, right? This is one of the biggest differences, I believe, between us and a lot of the other Caribbean nations. They had to fight and scratch and claw for what they have now post-independence. We got oil, and the oil may run out, we jam in still. I want to hit one more story at least, if my computer won't freeze on me here. This one, I'm not necessarily surprised that it just is what it is. From Airlink Week, WASA CEO is warning people that as the dry season advances, there's reduced rainfall. She's trying to get ahead of any potential problems because she's saying the reservoirs are not necessarily have reached critical levels yet, but she still wants to warn people, look, rainfall levels have reduced and we need to be conscious about water conservation. Now, one of the things, I was in Tobago, there was a lot of rain. I didn't necessarily know if that rain translated to rain for Trinidad because it doesn't always. And, or at least different parts of Trinidad to hit the reservoirs that were well below the average. But it seemed as though the December month period somehow compensated for a significant of lack of rain for the, 3 to 4 months preceding it, or maybe even 6 months preceding it. Now, to what extent did we just get lucky that we were below the average, but yet we got this topping up scenario right at the end? And it just happened so quickly that I didn't even notice it until, to some extent, the new year, when I realized, oh, the reservoirs, they're back up, and I didn't necessarily speak on it before. But this is fair. Not all reservoirs are at a high level. Hillsborough is at 94% when the long-term average is 77.8. The Hollis Reservoir is only at 77.8, where its long-term average is 76.69. So some reservoirs are in a better position than others. We're not critical yet, but that doesn't mean that we can't get there depending on how the rains for the dry season turn out. Now, potentially it's a wetter than normal dry season. That doesn't necessarily translate to guaranteed rain and sustenance of our water levels. So we have to wait and see how that goes. Ironically, I don't necessarily know if everything in WASA has been cured, but it hasn't been that bad, unless you live in a part of the country that feels completely neglected by the government and by wesn, then that's a whole different argument. But take this warning to heart, folks. Water conservation, it's a tricky thing because it's not about not cutting down trees or anything like that. It's literally with regards to the water supply for human consumption. All right. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'll just get into a minor international topic about trade. Small news from yesterday. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN. We'll be right back after this.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage, and we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Pastor J, I want to get a tattoo.
You really
respond to me. Respond to me how you would respond to me.
The first question I'll ask is why?
Controversial taboo topics.
We get so consumed by church, we forget that we have to live the life of being a Christian outside of the Sunday.
Like you say,
services, yeah.
We think going to a service makes us a Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. So here we are about to hear the second time Pastor J wanted to take a tattoo.
Would have been late last year and early this year.
Oh gosh.
Hope Unfiltered podcast with Pastor J and Ren.
Now, one of the things that we have unfortunately experienced more than once over the last couple of years is external economic shocks, particularly to things like the price of food, but also disruptions in international trade has been one of the sources of those shocks that caused shipping anything really to kind of go up post-COVID, because COVID unbalanced the flow of trade. And for whatever reason, last I checked, now it could have been months ago, that imbalance has remained because people's habits change. Now, during COVID, obviously people couldn't go anywhere and do anything, but apparently the whole idea about consuming goods by buying them online as opposed to going out into the world, to some extent, that change in consumer pattern persisted, and we are where we are. On top of other things happening, like energy prices fluctuations due to availability fluctuations due to a war going on, or due to somebody down south of us, you know, wanting to get off sanctions but have his cake and eat it too, apparently. We are often and not caught in the middle. So now, and a lot of Trinis love Trump, and to be fair, I don't disagree with him on everything. And the basic concepts of what he's trying to do, in some to many cases, I haven't actually taken stock, so I don't want to necessarily lock in anything that implies a figure. But generally speaking, I don't necessarily have an issue with the basic concept that we're trying to do. How we're trying to do it, on the other hand, I would argue the effectiveness is very debatable, to say the least. The latest rounds of tariffs that he's looking to impose now, this is towards the EU. It might potentially cause a trade war down the line, because essentially in all cases they're looking to, we wanted to reciprocate something to the UK's visa requirement. This is a different level where the EU, which is several of the top 10 economies of the world, is looking at the United States and saying, we could put tariffs on too. And the point for us is that it can disrupt trade in general. It could cause fluctuations in prices of certain commodities because of this. All of these things could indirectly affect us. But before I get into that, let's hear some commentary from one of the English European media houses on the situation, the tit for tat between the EU and the United States. It's time to cue this.
Loss. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said the EU remains open to negotiating with the White House.
Our countermeasures will be introduced in 2 steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations. We firmly believe that in a world fraught with geo-economic and political uncertainties, it is not in our common interest to burden our economies with such tariffs.
Marie Sina from DW Business joins me now in the studio. Marie, tell us more about the EU's response to Trump's tariffs. What exactly is the EU targeting with its own?
Right, so the EU seems to have done its homework. It built up a so-called Trump task force, which spent much of last year preparing for any trade conflicts. And that has made the EU a lot nimbler and more decisive in its response, which is what we're seeing now. So just 1 hour after these US tariffs came into effect, the EU reacted with a 2-step approach, targeting a total of 26 billion euros worth of exports from the US to Europe. Step 1 will be targeting traditionally American exports. We're thinking peanut butter, bourbon, motorcycles, and these have a lot of symbolic value, but the real economic value will be in step 2, which is meant to go into effect in mid-April, and EU member states still have to decide which products exactly will be targeted here, but the products that are being floated are aluminum, textiles, but also even American beef. So really, the EU acting quite decisively here.
What impact are all these tariffs expected to have on Europe's economy?
Right, so if we're just looking at these steel and aluminum tariffs, they're expected to have an impact of 26 billion euros on the EU economy, so the same amount as the retaliatory tariffs. What's important to remember here is that the EU has been exporting a lot less steel and aluminum to the US over the last few years. So Germany, for example, exports just 4% of its steel to the US. Most of its steel actually goes to its European neighbors. But the big economic worry is that this will develop into a tit-for-tat and a trade war, and that the US could next, for example, target European cars, which would be a much bigger hit to Europe's economy. So the big fear really is what's to come.
So we've got these blanket tariffs from the U.S. being imposed on all countries across the board, including the European Union. Is there any indication where this might be going next?
I think where this might be going next is the question on everyone's mind around the world, it seems, because Trump has been so hot and cold and so unpredictable. And a good example of that is what happened just yesterday, where Trump announced 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and metal, and he pulled back just a few hours later and pulled that back to 25%. So it's really difficult to plan anything in this kind of environment. And on top of that, looking at the EU-US relationship, the EU has made it very clear that it wants to keep its doors open for negotiation. It sent its trade chief to Washington to negotiate some sort of compromise last month, and he left disappointed, saying he felt there was no interest in an actual deal. When he went on to say you can't clap with just one hand, so you can't come to any sort of solution to these problems without the US even articulating the solution that it wants. And so that's really the problem everywhere, this wide-ranging uncertainty, and it's not just a problem politically, but also for the economy. Businesses globally need to plan their supply chains, how much they will export, how much they will be selling, and they can't do any of that. And another repercussion we've seen just at the beginning of this week is the stock market feeling uneasy about all of this uncertainty. So this is having real repercussions, and the only thing that's certain is uncertainty.
Marie, thank you very much for your insights there. Marie Sina from DW Business.
So this is where, let me just say first, I do think that Trump is being too aggressive. You can't change nation economies overnight. You can't go from importing steel to manufacturing steel. You don't just have factories ready to go lying around, workers ready to go lying around to go the next day. To what extent is he trying to transition his economy to more local manufacturing or internal manufacturing? Because, you know, America's so big, local is a relative term. But if you try to do it too fast, you run the risk of disrupting economic activity because you're disincentivizing continuing how distribution and supply channels are happening in the current situation, saying buy less outside, cool, but inside you have alternatives ready to go. And part of the problem is he's leveled tariffs to Mexico, to Canada. He's trying to do different economic situations, deal with it at the same time. Can his own economy bear the shock? This is on top of dealing with illegal immigration, which will have a knock-on effect on labor supply, which will have a knock-on effect on the economy as well. And, you know, I and people that I've spoken to wonder if it's too much at the same time, too soon, too quickly. Part of it is, as towards the end there was mentioned, that the US wasn't even engaging with the EU with regards to what were the solutions they would propose. It makes me wonder if the technocrats, they themselves don't know, because Trump is running the ship. That's why he will change his mind quickly. And it seems as though he's trying to run the United States as though he would run his own business. The problem with that, primarily outside of the ethical things, I don't think he's running it like he owns the United States, but rather he's utilizing a certain decision-making mentality of how to move with regards to speed, timing, etc., etc. And the problem with that is your business is smaller than the US. Your private business will always be more agile than the US because it's one business as opposed, even if it's, you know, a holding company with multiple other companies underneath it, it is but one entity. And a nation is essentially, by definition, and in the US case because of its size, hundreds of entities that are not all going to be able to pivot as fast. It's just a scale issue that I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the ethics of how he treats because of what if he feels he's in charge and what he owns. No, it's about the fact that he's accustomed to certain maybe negotiating tactics, management decisions, certain timelines, and maybe he isn't aware that an entire country can't pivot like a company can. But there's two things or three things we should take out of this. First of all, the EU was ready for potential trade conflicts with America. What does that say? That says that, and they prepared for this last year. That says that they looked at the possibility of Trump being elected, and they did not necessarily show a similar hand to what our government showed, regardless of if that hand our government showed was the truth or not, which is to try to have a sense of confidence in the status quo. They didn't. Our government wanted to present a certain amount of confidence that the status quo would be okay vis-a-vis Dragon, but the EU was like, nah, we ain't taking that for granted. And again, it goes back to this show and other stakeholders essentially saw the warning signs, saw the possibility. Good leadership has a certain amount of prudence built in, but I guess now we're potentially, depending on how the OFAC situation unfolds, we have to scramble last minute, whereas the EU were prepared. Now, yes, that's a much bigger situation than TNT, but at the end of the day, to some extent, the basics of it, I think the scale doesn't necessarily make a difference because it was obvious enough of a consideration that economists and TV personalities, commentators, etc., pointed to this potential pitfall. It seemed obvious enough. The man on the street could have figured this out. But more importantly, as we saw with COVID, then the shipping crisis, then the energy, well, not necessarily crisis. That was a positive for us, not necessarily for maybe our Caribbean neighbors, but the cost of food that also coincided with the energy boom, windfall that we got. The 1 year we weren't in deficit in the budget. Because the breadbasket of the world basically got shut off for, you know, most of 2020 and beyond. 2 to 3 budgets ago, I said we need to have a plan, we need to be ready. What are we going to do for a rainy day? Nothing in the budget says that we have any facility or consideration beyond using up the HSF, I guess, in which case, when it's gone, it'll be gone. It will be practically never to be seen again if an emergency forces us to use it up in such a way like that. We're not necessarily at the point where we have to hit the panic button, but we do have to ask, depending on the EU is worried it might end up in a trade war with America. What does that mean for us? Who do we import from? We get most of our food from America. Depending on the disruptions to the economies, it could not necessarily be, it doesn't have to be anything direct to happen to us. It doesn't even have to be something that is indirect per se. It could be indirect, but multiple stages of indirect, trickle-down effects that then touch on the things that directly matter to us, but were not directly affected. It was indirectly affected through 6 degrees of separation. Who knows? But the flip side to that is, when you have tariffs that make certain economic relationships less tenable, what may happen is certain suppliers may need to find new buyers. Certain buyers may need to find new suppliers. They are not necessarily all going to wait for the situation to calm down and to revert back to normal. Not every business could wait on that. And there's no certainty that the new normal would persist. Now, I don't necessarily know what opportunities might present itself from this, but the fact of the matter is, when you have major shifts in economic policy, generally speaking, a window is open for you to at the very least peek into, see what might be possible, see what changes might occur. Even with the pandemic, I pointed to the fact that, look, it's an opportunity to have certain changes. Culturally, we might have been more ready to accept local food production during and straight out of the pandemic, but we didn't. And now we're back on the foreign imported food because it's cheaper and we love all of the extra salt and fat and grease and unhealthy crap. Cool. Stuart Young has said he'll do a lot of things differently. I wonder, I can't remember if he said anything about diversification. Yes, he may have given us the lip service stuff that we hear from politicians every 6 months or what have you. But will we actually see anything as we progress in time, and our situation at the end of the day becomes worse and worse. Yes, the Prime Minister, I believe he did kind of bring back the diversification talk, Dr. Keith Rowley, once the whole OFAC situation, once we heard from the United States, hey, party done. And we may not get the Dragon deal. And even with the Dragon deal, our economic situation may not have solved itself. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they're still looking at this refinery. So, what will we do? Our private sector is risk averse, and to some extent, I can't totally blame them given the way how our government has overseen our economy and the various industries within. Will we be able to find new opportunities and pivot to them? Opportunities that could be to start something, create something. I don't necessarily know what that is. Therefore, I don't have the vision required. So, I am an example of who not to vote for, of what we don't necessarily need. We need people to have that vision, to find things that most of us can't find, to see things that most of us can't see, and to implement things that most of us won't dare to implement. Because we've reached the point now where in the past, if we wanted to transition our economy to something else and diversify, it probably would have just been a matter of spending our money. But the money's dried up, so now, rather than being in a position of strength, we're in a position of weakness. So now we have to do more with less. And doing more with less might require taking some risk, but definitely will require innovation as opposed to just, well, pour some money on it and hope the problem goes away. Which, for the most part, seems to be 99% of the institutional knowledge of our political class. Take the money that the energy sector earns, pour it into the problem, in not always the most effective manner, usually in an ineffective manner, and hope that the problem goes away. But since it's never worked, the problems have never necessarily gone away. They've just accumulated, and now we have to deal with it when we've already squandered all of the money at the casinos. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the old phone lines. We could hear from you, the viewer. You could call in and have your say. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN. We'll be right back after this.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this is screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe in different criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out
to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
We're back here talking about on WSN show. Michael Small here once again. Probably the latest time I've introduced myself. I don't even know why. I'm not important. What's important is to hear from you, the viewer. What do you have to say? I have spoken a lot, so I beg you, please do not allow me to continue going on and on and on. Call in and interrupt me. You can have your say. Just remember, when you are talking to me through the telephone, please don't try to follow the conversation on the television broadcast. There's a delay. With that said, we have our first caller for the morning, Nico Martin. Good morning, caller. You are on the air.
Good morning, Sean. I want to talk about visa and the UK. I could say that is a practical protocol for issuance of visa for Trinidad nationals. And for the current foreign Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, for him not to see that was coming down the pipeline, I will give him some idea as a observer to what is happening. First of all, we have a situation that anybody could board a plane and just go to the UK and, as they say, ask for asylum and argue the case and spend some time. What has happened and why that is happening, and from the UK advantage, we have open borders. We have a lot of miscreants coming from Venezuela. After 6 months, they could board a plane and go up. So that is one issue. The second issue, we have a bigger problem. You remember that Casey, affidavit? That is a conspiracy by high government official to defraud the UK government taxes that is due from a national of the UK earning money. That is what, that was a conspiracy. We were trying to hide the information from the UK that Casey was earning a set of money, even £10 million. So that is a conspiracy. That tells me, hey, we're looking at your government, what they're doing. Concomitant with that, in 2023, 2022, the Americans put out some information where high government officials are doing illicit act. You remember that? And then you remember there was a long circular shooting where the owner of a fitness thing got shot. He couldn't go to the United States because he had some information and some system in the police service. So he's in the UK. And now he's trying to wipe it off. So I don't know why he's trying to wipe off his record in Trinidad, where intelligence have it. Now, that particular individual, there is a video circulating with his connection on social media with a lot of high government officials. Very, very damning statement. And when they say finances and things like that, I believe they were pointing to that individual. And the fact that the police was sleeping on all intelligence and they allow people to migrate because, COP Benjamin looking for 13 of them who they have warrants to hold and he can't find them. Have they migrated to the UK too? I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. Well, one of the things I have to ask just directly in response to that is, I don't know to what extent the visa will limit criminals from going to the UK. Because one would think, all right, if you need to have some kind of background check, well, we didn't have that. I guess we didn't have that before. So now that they've introduced a process, they did have the electronic transfer agreement. So I don't know to what extent that would have been robust enough. And maybe you're right, but you didn't necessarily need the monetary fees. But I guess the fees, to some extent, has to pay the processing for the visas. But my point is, the criminals don't care about 11,000 TT dollars to go to the UK or 1,000 TT dollars to go to the UK. So that in and of itself is not going to be a barrier to them. To what extent the process itself and any potential requirement for background checks and personal information, to what extent will that? And then also there is And this is where it might be a Peter pay for Paul situation as well. Say you're from Sealots, you're a hard-working person from the Beatum, you're from Mova, you know, you could be from any of those places and you could be an honest person trying to make it out of poverty. And now you want to go to the UK for whatever reason. And the High Commission might be like, hotspot that has travel advisories for embassy personnel not to go to. We'll just make the assumption and deny a visa. I don't know. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think Venezuelans coming to TNT and then going to the UK is a thing because you would need a TNT passport. And outside of certain cases, which may or may not be corruption, that's not a thing. I don't believe asylum seekers, Venezuelans who are asylum seekers in TNT could just automatically travel to the UK. Now, they could potentially try to get, travel to seek asylum, but it won't be quite the same as a Trinidad and Tobago national. They won't have our passport. They won't have that same status, right, within the Commonwealth. They won't be a Commonwealth citizen. So I don't think that is a concern. I think more it is the local concern, the concern of our people going there and gaming the system, as well as the fact that the situation is more sensitive, and if crime is a factor, then that whole scenario might increase, and the UK is saying, we don't want to see an increase. We don't want to see an increase. We were fine where it was, but y'all taking too far, even if it's just a toe over the line, and we're doing something about it. And like you pointed out, maybe this was just a long time coming. Maybe we're taking it for granted and feel entitled to the special relationship we had with regards to our TNT passport traveling to the UK. We have San Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
This UK visa situation is just, how will I put it, par for the course, based on the UK's normal modus operandi. Prior to this, the issuance of our visa restriction, which took effect when was it, on the 12th, they said the only other country in the English-speaking Caribbean was Jamaica, and it was a similar situation. As the UK ambassador said yesterday, not the ambassador, but the UK High Commissioner said yesterday that there was an increase in unjustified asylum application. Unjustified, use that word. And that increase went up. It was a 29% increase from over the 2023 figures in 2024. And I can understand the UK, and this is the same situation that caused the Canadian government to do the same thing years ago when we had people going up there from Trinidad and Tobago with the same unjustified asylum claims. And this happened to us. That is our own citizens who have done this to a minority has done this to the majority. So don't blame and trying to blame the government and this. That is not the situation. It is our own citizens that spoil a few, spoil it for the many, and it is what it is. Now, when you spoke about the trade wars and how prepared the EU was for that in that particular play there. Because of our because of our lack of diversification, trade war or not, we are going to see some problems. As you correctly pointed out, because of our foreign exchange situation as well. What I see happening in Trinidad and Tobago is adaptation. Trinidad and Tobago citizens have been starting to adapt to the situation. We have been starting. I am seeing things on a different trajectory to you. And let me say this: because what you see happening is still seeing people are still building, people are still doing stuff that you would expect not to see happening if the economy was as bad as some people say it is.
Right.
But it is not as bad. You still see the new cars on the road. You're still seeing these things. So I think what will happen in the not too distant future, when after the election, whoever is the government, it doesn't matter who takes the reins of power in later 2025. What we're going to see is the population will continue to adjust themselves to the realities. One of the things that they have to do, however, is I see a new government coming in, and I hope they do this. Similar to what, and a lot of people don't like it, what Elon Musk has been appointed to do.
Yeah.
I see that as a practical step in Trinidad and Tobago to fix a lot of the ills within the system. As similar to the US, there's too much fat inside of there, and we need to trim down our state agencies to manageable sizes and to make them more efficient. And I hope whoever coming into power understands that this is a step that is necessary, and you have to do it early o'clock in the game.
Yeah.
Early o'clock in the game. All of them need to understand that. I think to some extent the smaller parties understand that. And again, I listened to a UNC partnership meeting last night, and all these similar stupid promises, but cutting property, no more taking away property tax, and a sort of stupidness that they are not. It's not practical. They're not. They're looking at power and not looking at country.
Yeah.
And that is my problem. That has always been my problem. It's about country, not just power for you and your minions. Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, caller. Well, a couple of things. I don't have my ear perfectly ground, so you and I might be seeing different things and taking different things away from it, and that's one of my fears. The new car onslaught that happened within the last 6 months, I can't necessarily remember, but all of a sudden, or maybe last year, we went from PED to PEG. I think we're now PEH technically. Tout suite, lots of new hybrid SUVs, mid-size or smaller SUVs, new high-end luxury models on the road. And I do wonder if that's giving us, it's maybe a false flag and it's a bit misleading. Do we have another call? Okay, let me just say this way, because I did say, pointing out to the cars in an episode before, I do wonder if big business and politicians especially, they're so far removed from what's going on the ground, they might be getting a false read on the economy. You're not wrong. The economy seemingly is stable right now, but I do wonder if it, not necessarily close to disaster, but it still might not be as good and as strong as you think it is, because there are some indicators we have not necessarily successfully adjusted throughout all areas, not necessarily industry-wise, but various geographic demographics or areas of the country might not have all been able to successfully adapt as much as others. And again, how much do we really produce to say that we could cover everything? I doubt. But I'll have to stick up in and out. We have Mova waiting. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Well, I just listened to Mr. San Fernando, one of his points. I have to say, I hardly believe that the two major parties, especially this party, will take the chance or change their direction and try to cut out the wastage in government because, Sean, I mean, you know that.
Yeah.
Mr. Fernando has to know that too. This wastage is part and parcel of to remain in power. And as I keep saying, Sean, this wastage became the norm during those years, those crucial years, 60 to 80, especially when the boom came. All these are things in which we are allowed to stay in power. So first of all, I could see possibly the smaller parties going in that direction. I could never see the PNM going in that direction. Right. My next point is, while some of us, while trying to defend our party, because that is a thing in Trinidad and Tobago, talking about the people in the past who went to UK for asylum and used wrong not genuine points they raised to get armed. It happened in Canada some years ago. But Sean, is anyone asking themselves the question, had this country been governed better, do you think we would have that many people wanting to leave? You see, nobody is speaking about that. No, I'm not saying this to actually blame government because Sean, and you know my position on the PNM, but I'm saying that has to be something that is taken into account also, right? When you have in a country and you can't get justice, okay, when you can't even get rest in your house because of noise, and there's a long process that's going around in circles, all these things contribute, Sean, to people wanting to leave, and sometimes they are desperate. Let's be clear. Sometimes they are desperate. There was a gentleman, Sean, that was connected to an issue with the CJ that left this country and got asylum in the UK in a matter of weeks. And I have always asked that question, what information could this man or did this man give to the UK authorities to get asylum so easily? Right? And no one speaks about these things. These are serious issues that we don't speak about. You know, plus, not so long ago, in one of the dailies, there was a full-page story about gang leaders from Trinidad and Tobago who are now resident in the UK and who are running their apparatus or whatever you want to call it. And trying to spread into the US. All these things, these are the things we need to speak about, not trying to pin it on a certain demographic of the population. Those are the issues we need to speak about. Have a good day.
Thank you, caller. I'll say this, the brain drain situation, it happens for a lot of reasons. One of them is for the fact that people do look at the quality of life difference. Some of it is opportunity. You know, I can't necessarily be a nuclear physicist in TNT. Right, fair enough. But part of that is just quality of life. Now, some of that, we will not be able to compete with a country like the United States or the UK because we're a small nation. The flip side to that is our quality of life should have certain intrinsic advantages built in. We're in the Caribbean, we have the beaches, we have the stable tropical weather, etc., etc. So that should balance out the inequalities that we would have less economic advantages due to our scale and size. I mean, in theory, right? But this brain drain situation, our best and brightest, not in Parliament, folks, for the most part, our best and brightest in the UK and the US, Japan, China, South Korea, all over the world, but not where we need them the most. Maraval is on the line. I'll respond to other points after. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Hello. Hello. Good morning.
Morning.
I was talking about the visa, UK. UK visa, wonderful down, right? And as the Prime Minister said that the people of Trinidad is terrorists of Trinidad. So when these people now put down the visa and you want everybody want to complain, but you say it first. So what do you expect everybody to do? Follow suit to them, and you know. So that's what I'm saying. If you say the stupidness before, and you expect the people to follow what you say, you as the Prime Minister of this country have no right to come out and say people is terrorists in their own country. You know?
Yes, caller. Thank you. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. I may have implied something similar, but maybe not to this extent in the past, but I didn't connect the dots to this current situation. Now, granted, it's a bit of a war of semantics, but this is why you have to be careful with labels. You're right. not that the UK thinks, oh my gosh, Trinidad is a nation of terrorists, but if the government is basically saying, we're going to use our terrorist laws on these situations, it's going to cause the UK to be like, hold on, we need to think about this now. Their level of crime is on a different level. So to some extent, we don't know that it's not applicable. I understand where Mr. Sanford and others were coming from. We don't know that it's not applicable. It probably is not the main reason, but it probably also did not help, right? Because that's what happens when you pull out anti-terrorism laws to deal with street violence. You make the situation look worse than it is. Well, relatively speaking, the situation is, to be fair, that bad and has similarities to challenges to law enforcement as you would find with terrorism. Just it's not, the consequences, believe it or not, are not as severe as if it was actual terrorism. Believe it or not. Now, I want to go back to one of these things. I think Mr. San Fernando said it, and it got me thinking. Peter's paying for Paul. Yes, a few citizens are spoiling for money. Yes, but I think it's the case where saying, calling it a small minority might be wrong, might be underselling the situation. Because as you pointed out, 29%, and I don't know what the total figures are. I don't know if the High Commissioner said it. 29% of a small number is legitimately small. 29% of a large number, of a huge number, could be more than a significant proportion. It's all relative, right? But I think ultimately speaking, relatively speaking, it ain't no one or two people we're talking about here, right? We're talking about a history, a trend, a pattern of behavior. I don't even want to know what the estimates are, and the estimates might be underselling it. So now let's go to cleaning up the public sector. This is interesting. Ms. Caller from over and Mr. San Fernando touched on this. What did I say when I was talking about Stuart Young being the first Chinese? And I also lumped in, well, if you didn't pick up on it, I lumped in the situation where I had the first female commissioner. What I said was, the first might set a tone which might cause the debates to go off its rails. To what extent now are we looking at Ill as the first female commissioner and saying, because some people will say this. I'm not saying it, but this is what will happen. It's human nature. Some cross-section economy will then say no more female commissioners, which is not fair because Ayla is just one person that was to some degree hired because of the internal politics of the police service and the political situation that oversaw it at the time. And the police service itself, yes, it needed a much more exceptional person, and I don't even know if we have such a person, to be fair. Now, with regards to this whole situation with Dodge and Elon Musk, the problem is, it's similar. It's not quite the same, but it's similar. Elon Musk's institution, it was supposed to be with Vivek Ramaswamy. Vivek apparently bowed out. I thought that was a major red flag once I saw that happening, because this is why. Elon Musk is one of those guys, like Trump, I'm in charge, I do things my way, I think I know best. Which is fine when it's your company, and I believe I said this before. If he wants to make a decision and it ends up with him eating a $2 billion loss, that's his prerogative because it's his money. And he, for situations where he's not the sole shareholder, he needs to toe the line to ensure that he's not voted out from any executive positions, right? Chairman of the board, CEO, etc., whatever his respective positions are formally. With regards to Dodge, and apparently he's already ruffled feathers, Ramaswamy, I believe, would have been a moderating influence. Someone who would have spoken, who would have talked him off of his, how to put it, tempered his aggression, but from a place of understanding and agreeing with the overall objective and the basic principles of what they were trying to achieve, as opposed to having a critic who was trying to oppose him for opposing's sake. But alas, he does not have that moderating influence. It is what it is. And I do wonder if people will look on, have a negative opinion of what's going on with Dodge, and I can't necessarily fault them for that, at least not 100%, and say, we don't want that in our country. And it kind of goes back to another situation when the Prime Minister put his foot in his mouth over domestic violence, and it caused the debate to shift, not from the challenges that the police face with certain domestic violence cases, but rather what the Prime Minister said. I'm not going to repeat it because I'm not here. That's not the point. The point is, I do think now that if you want to use Elon Musk and Dodge as an example, you run the risk of taking the debate and it's shifting to, but Musk is a crazy man, why we want that here? As opposed to the basic concept of what was supposed to be achieved. Whether or not it will actually be implemented is a whole different story. But the example is bad, it might derail the argument because we might be debating the example as opposed to the basic concept, which already is an uphill battle, as was pointed out by the caller from over. Because we lack any sort of political will, and dare I say, and I've said this once before, societal will. Politicians come from us, and they do take some direction from how we respond, what feedback we give. So it's not just political will, it's a lack of societal will. Because when you have a two-party system where the opposition basically does everything it can to disagree with the government just for the sake of opposing them and disagreeing with them, but yet in certain things, their behavior is similar. Right? One would think one of the low-hanging fruits for the UNC right now would be to promise that they will clean up the public sector because the PNM had 10 years and they didn't do fat with regards to that. But we're not seeing that. Why? Because the UNC knows not to make that promise because they don't want to touch that with a 10-inch pole. They don't have the political will to do it either because to some extent we don't have the societal will. Now, I'll just say this. I myself would have hoped that the third parties would have given us more, but at this stage, as we get nearer to the election, my hope in third parties is getting less and less. Because I don't see the agency and I don't see the foundation building, which honestly should have happened like a year or two ago. And trying to do that now, trying to scramble to put things in place now, I'm sorry, it's hard for me to have faith in that. We've already seen what happened to New Kids on the Block with regards to the COP. They got consumed by the UNC, and their situation was so bad, they have set themselves up to let it happen again, potentially. Meanwhile, in Tobago, we've seen the growing pains of a new party come from the grassroots, have a bit of a foundation, but the foundation was still not entirely secure. It wasn't completely solid. And they had to go through those growing pains in more ways than one, which included a split and a rebrand. Because, you know, it's kind of hard to have a democratic political party when someone owns it. So, until we, and I have coming back to that brain drain situation again, coming back to the fact that I question the capacity of our leadership and the quality of the people that we accept as leaders. The best and brightest are not in Parliament, they are abroad. Or, what few that are still here, they're in boardrooms of private corporations, too busy earning more money than government would pay them, and the ones that are truly exceptional don't want to be caught up in all of this nonsense. They want to avoid it because they can't deal with it. They can't deal with the bacchanal and the Bmobile. They want to work. They want to earn their money, live their life, have their peace, and not have this nonsense. And nonsense is not the word that I want to use in this case. It begins with B and ends with it. So we could have this song and dance of whose fault it was and who we think might be giving us the better Nancy story promises until the cows come home. But I honestly think, Dr. Shane Mohammed said this about the UNC in particular, they need a better quality of candidates. The PNM is giving us something a little bit different. Is it better? We have to wait and see. Do I have hope that we will see something better coming out of this election? I don't know. There are still a few individuals in Parliament and not in Parliament yet that I still have some hope for. But a few isolated individuals a future vision does not make. I guess now is the time where we really, as cliched as it sounds, we need a visionary, because the further we allow this business as usual thing to continue on, the more we take a hold for ourselves, the more extreme the issues and the problems grow, the more the solutions are not just going to be something that is within the norm, but rather we're going to need something that's exceptional, that's innovative to the point where it is something that we may have never even wanted to have done in the past, but now we're forced to do in order to try to get back on track for the future. But instead of actually looking for something like that, we're just trying to find the better of the less bad of all of the options available to us. That might be the process by which you buy a cheap lunch, not by which you determine your government. But I've gone on long enough, so I'll have to close it there. Thanks to the callers for calling in. The concerns for the UK situation, you could call in later, depending, but I agree, we're not entitled to anything. Maybe that should be the wake-up call, the slap in the face that we need to get our rear ends in gear. So, until we do so, it's up to all of us to make today a good day, as Mr. Shah would say. Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe out there, and throughout your day, even if you might feel a how and get upset at somebody, always remember it's nice to be nice. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
I am Dr. Delphina Ovid, your friendly neighborhood dentist. At Community Hospital Dental Clinic, we offer examinations which include x-rays, basic oral cancer screening, and a treatment plan. We also offer cleanings, fillings,